And welcome back to the Principles of Economics. Today we're going to talk about a model, a very important and famous model. It's called the supply and demand model. It's one of the oldest models in economics. It's still used all over the place. It's very powerful and it's very interesting. When you think about the supply and demand model, I think it's best to think about a particular market in the market economy. It could be the bike market on a college campus. It could be a market for gasoline sold by gas stations all in the area. It could be the stock market, could be the labor market, all very important markets. And all of them can be analyzed and approached with the supply and demand model. But I'd just like to try to pick one of these for examples. I'm going to pick a bike market to go through this and explain how it works. And then later on we can explain how it works in other markets. So when I talk about the supply and demand model, I emphasize the word a model. It really is a theory, a way to describe in some detail the data, to make predictions and to interpret what's going on. In my view, the supply and demand model is really pretty remarkable. It's simple, it's pretty easy to understand once you get into it, and it can explain really what looks like completely chaotic activity in auction markets or just in everyday markets. And we'll see as we go through this course that the idea of a supply and demand model can come from this central idea that people make choices with scarce resources and then interact with other people in markets when they do this. And so we'll see that in the course of describing the supply and demand model. And it has certainly been around a long time, over 100 years. So let's get started in thinking about this model. And we'll think about first demand, and then we'll think about supply, and we'll see how those two things interact together. So first of all, what do we mean by demand? Actually, economists have a particular meaning for demand. They mean a relationship between the price of a good and the quantity of the good that is demanded, quantity demanded by people. So if it's a quantity demanded for a bicycle, they want to see how the price of bicycles affects the quantity demanded of bicycles by people. Demand also refers largely to consumers. As we'll see, supply refers to firms, but demand refers to consumers. It's going to be downward sloping, and we're going to emphasize an important difference in this demand relationship or demand curve, as we'll see, and that is shifts in this demand versus movements along the demand curve. And so that's kind of a preview of what we're going to be doing. Let's start with a numerical example of demand for bicycles in a particular area. So we've just chosen kind of a garden variety bicycle. Of course, there's a wide range of special bicycles, kids bicycles, mountain bicycles, whatever it happens to be. We're just going to take the average, somehow a garden variety average type bicycle, not that expensive, not that cheap, and the price range we're going to consider is, say, $140 a bicycle up to $300 per bicycle. And in this chart, this table, it shows that the higher is the price, the lower is the quantity demanded. I'm seeing quantity demanded of bicycles, say, in millions of bicycles in this area. So when the price rises from $140 per bike to $160 a bike, the quantity demanded goes from 18 to 14. And that makes just common sense if you think about it yourself. If bicycles become more expensive, then fewer people will decide to buy a bicycle. They might just want to walk instead, or to use their rollerblades or whatever it happens to be if the bike gets more expensive. And so that reduces the quantity demanded. If the price goes up, say, to $180, quantity demanded goes down further. Even fewer people will decide to buy a bicycle. If it's really cheap, like $140, you might have people to buy 2 or 3 bicycles. Well, that's going to really be cut out when the price gets higher too. So for all these reasons, as the price rises, the quantity demanded goes down, and that's what this little example purports to show. You can also illustrate this graphically, and that's where the word demand curve comes from. So we can take those data in this little numerical example and plot them. In this particular chart, we put the quantity demanded on the horizontal axis and the price per bicycle in dollars on the vertical axis. And the little black marks there are just the points in that table. So you can see each point in the table represented by a little black dot. Just mindlessly go make those plots, and that's what you get. And then you also want to, at least I'd like to be able to better see the graph by connecting the dots. So those dots are connected with a red line just to help you see what's going on. And now we have what's called the demand curve, because it's now something that's visible like a curve or like a line. And you can see it is downward sloping. And that again represents the fact when the price is lower, the quantity demanded of bicycles is going to go up, and vice versa. Higher price, lower quantity demanded. Now that demand curve, we're going to think about changing that demand curve over time or in different ways. So we want to be very precise what we mean by changes in that demand curve. So we're going to describe both shifts of the demand curve and movements along the demand curve. And this chart is to illustrate that. So first, imagine that you're on the place in the beginning of this chart, along that line somewhere, okay? And that's basically the demand curve we drew. So imagine you're on that thing. And then the movements along the curve occur when the price goes up and the price goes down. So at point C, the price is lower than at point A, and the quantity demand is higher. And so that's a movement along the curve. And if you go in the other direction, the price goes up and the quantity demanded goes down. Those are movements along the curve. But we also have reasons for the curve to shift because other things affect the bicycle demand than the price. So for example, if the weather gets extra nice in the spring, people might want to buy bicycles and they'll buy more even at the same price. Or there may be a real concern about the environment and people would like to drive bicycles rather than cars. And so at any given price, there'll be a greater demand for bicycles. Or the price of other goods might change. So the price of rollerblades might go down. And people want to get fewer bicycles for that reason. It's cheaper to get the rollerblades. So a lot of different things can happen that cause these curves to shift. And by shift, I mean thinking about the price at a particular level, let's say at 200, and we're saying if there's a shift in demand, then there's more demanded, as you can see, at that price than at A because the curve shifted out to the right. Or over here at that same $200, there's less quantity demanded at that point because the price is the same, but something else has changed. So those are shifts in the demand curve, and they occur when anything changes except the price. When the price changes, that's a movement along the curve. When something else changes, it's a shift of the curve. And it's really important to keep those straight. It sounds pedantic, like, geez, we're being insistent that you use your language extra right, extra precisely. It's really because we want to organize our thinking, because we want to use this analysis, the supply and demand model, to really make predictions about what happens to price or quantity after some event, like a change in the weather or a change in people's tastes for bikes. Okay, so that's demand. Now let's do supply. Same kind of ideas, except we're not going to be thinking largely of the firms that produce the goods, the firms that produce the bicycles, rather than the consumers that buy the goods or buy the bicycles. It's still going to be a relationship. Supply is a relationship, in this case between the price of the good and the quantity that firms want to supply. The relationship will be generally upward sloping, unlike the demand curve, which is downward sloping. But we also want to consider shifts of the curve and movements along the curve. They're very important to distinguish those two, as was the case of demand. So let's get started with an example, again, sticking with this bicycle market that we've looked at already. And now we want to look at how the price affects the quantity supplied. So in this little table, we have the price in the first column. The range of prices is the same as it was for the case of demand. It's going up 140, 160, 180, et cetera. But the second column is the quantity supplied of bicycles in millions. And you can see as the price goes up, in this case, so does the quantity supplied. So it's the behavior of firms we're describing here. Why does this happen? Well, think of yourself as being a firm producing something, and you find out the product that you're selling or producing, its price goes up. Well, then if you're interested in profits and making money, you're going to sell more of those as the price that you get in the market goes up. Each time the price goes up by a bit, you want to produce a little more. That extra incentive, it provides an incentive for you to produce more. That higher price in the market of the thing you're producing provides that extra incentive to produce more. And that's the reason for the curve being upward sloping. We're going to delve into the behavior of firms quite a bit more as this course proceeds, to think about their costs, think about the profit-making, motivation, et cetera. And we're always going to be going back to that same mantra of economics of choice with scarcity. Now, we can represent this supply schedule, this table, with a graph as well. Okay, so that's what this next chart does. It takes the same information in the table and plots it. Again, on the vertical axis is we have the price of bicycles per bicycle, and we have on the horizontal axis the quantity of bicycles supplied. And then the little black dots are the points just plotted, and I've connected them in this case with a blue line so you can see the supply curve. It's an upward sloping curve in general, and it describes the behavior of firms. Just like the demand curve, we can talk about shifts and movements along the supply curve. And that's what this diagram endeavors to do. Very analogous to the demand curve. The light shaded one in the middle, think of that as just a redrawing of the supply curve. And I'll just show you that along this curve right here. That's the supply curve. And as we move along that curve, we're describing how the quantity supplied changes as the price changes. So as you go from point D, say, to point F, that is an increase in the price, and we're seeing it's an increase in the quantity supplied. That's just movement along the curve. If the price goes down from D to E, then we're seeing a decline in the quantity supplied. Again, movements along the curve because the thing that is changing to change that quantity supplied is indeed the price. Just as in demand, though, you can have shifts in supply itself. At a given price, firms might want to sell more, for example. Why might that occur? Well, suppose the technology of making bikes improves dramatically so the bike producers can sell them at even a lower, they can sell them with making fewer costs. It costs less to produce a particular bike. Well, then they're going to have more incentive to produce bikes, even if the price of bicycles in the markets doesn't change, because their costs have gone down. So in that case, you'll get a movement in the demand, in the supply curve, just in this direction. So that's an increase in supply, a shift in supply. It's not a movement along, it's a movement to a new curve. And similar may go the other direction. Suppose the cost of producing bicycles rise, maybe the price of skilled technicians that produce the fancy bikes, their wage goes up, and that's going to make it more costly to produce, and so at a given price, the manufacturers will produce less. So you get these shifts of the curve as well as movements along the curve. And when we use the supply and demand model to predict what happens to price and quantity, and that's our ultimate objective, we want to be very clear that we distinguish between those shifts due to some event, like a change in environmental consciousness or a change in technology for supply, and see how it affects price and quantity. And that's what we're going to be doing in the next segment. Thank you, and I'll see you then.